So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War, and to another battle replay, and this is going to be quite an interesting one, because this isn't one that I was actually sent, this is one that I just lifted off of the results section on the Silmarillion Discord, because where I was going to have a scenario that I was a part of, that I was going to record and do for today, unfortunately, because of some PC issues, J-Monster, who was a part of that game, unfortunately ended up crashing, which is a shame. Hopefully that scenario can make a return in the future, because it was one that included bonkers army compositions, to be honest with you, with 8 mangonels in total, 9 units of heavy Fëanor cavalry, a bunch of really fun stuff, and it was shaping up to be quite good, but J-Monster knew there was a fairly high risk of him blue screening during that battle because of some computer issues, but no one else was available, so he was a part of the game, and unfortunately his doomsaying came to pass, and yeah, unfortunate. But there was a battle that took place earlier on that same day, another map that was made by the Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. This one wasn't a custom scenario, this one was just a 4v4, very much sort of river-centric, with almost a King of the Hill type vibe over here on this central island with all of these ruins in various states of disrepair, this sort of, kind of like the Falls of Rauros over here, only not quite, of course. They look kind of horrifying, I have to say, actually, these statues, with how damaged and chipped away they are, but no matter. On one side we have, on the blue team side, we have Angband. It's worth saying as well, not exactly lore friendly, but the way you can look at this is it's almost like Angband and TOL and Gaurhoth are facing off against one another, and they've each had the ability to choose 3 factions to come and join them in their little civil war, so that's the closest thing to a theme that we're going to get from this one. And the blue team, Angband team captains, and they have decided to bring Fingolfin, Doriath, I believe it is, over there, indeed it is, and over on the far side they also have the Falathrim, which is quite interesting. And then over on the red team, Todd and Gaurhoth have decided to bring along with them today Finarfin, the Easterlings in the middle, and Ossiriand. So I would say the red team will probably benefit a little bit more from being a little bit more fluid, getting a little bit more movement. The only ones that are really sort of stand and fight kind of factions universally, I would say, are Finarfin, but then they are probably the very best at that, so it is an interesting sort of juxtaposition they've got there. It'll be interesting to see how the red team decide to go about that business. But overall, I would say the blue team are probably the ones that are best in a more conventional, straight-up brawl, because of the units they brought, both in terms of survivability and in terms of damage dealing, and tools that facilitate that as well. So we'll go through Captain Gervais first of all, who is playing as Angband. One of the 3 factions I would say that do stand out a little bit in terms of their strengths, more aggressive I would say than the other 2 really strong factions in the game as it stands. Ironshot Arbalists are good if you can get them into position. They have decent armour, so you can't skirmish them down super quickly. Some of the very best archers probably can, to be honest with you, but even then they tend to have lower ammunition anyway. But yeah, if you get the Ironshot Arbalists into a position to support an aggressive advance, they can be really, really good, especially in fights that are a little bit more contained, with a little bit more movement. Of course, Angband can be outmaneuvered, and then the Ironshots can be engaged in melee, which you don't want, especially not before they've used up their ammunition. Back here we have some standard Ironshot Ravages, so this is a sign that it's not a custom scenario, because Eclipse does so love to put all of the armour upgrades onto the units in his creations, but on this occasion we have the standard Ironshot Ravages. Nice amount of AP, of course, good charge, and yeah, nice spike of damage that you can have in and amongst all of your more functional rank and file units. We have the base sort of trash tier unit essentially, although that's a bit harsh on the Wretches of Angband, because trash isn't really how I would describe them. They can be very useful. You know, they tend to perform slightly better in melee than stuff like the Orc Fodder from the other various Third Age submods. But ultimately they are still, especially among the company that Silmarillion keeps, they are still relatively poor in terms of their ability to do damage in melee. But they are also spears, so you can use them to sort of zone out cavalry, but do remember that if they get charged, they will still die in droves. Ironshot Ravages back here, we have a rather classic sight to see an Angband frontline with lots of armoured units, albeit no armour upgrades on either the Halberdiers or the Reavers, the axe-wielding line infantry. So they trade in a little bit of melee defense for a little bit of melee attack. There actually is some armour upgrade, so there you can see the upgraded Ironshot model, which I think is getting a higher def version done, I believe. Not that there's anything really wrong with this model, but I have actually seen sort of some slightly altered versions of it, I think, in screenshots. But that's going to be the centre of the Angband line. We also have some Guardians of the Iron Crown, sort of heavier line infantry with those maces. very good for the AP. Troll Guard of Gothmog as well, so they aren't elephant class units, they are essentially jumbo-sized infantry, so they have very different counters to the Valar Alcar now. Spears and pikes, for example, will do quite well against the Valar Alcar. They'll do terribly, to be honest, against the Troll Guard, but of course the Troll Guard are a little bit more susceptible to shock infantry, up close and personal. The General's Bodyguard is the Bulldogs, which are a fantastic unit of sword and board bodyguard infantry. Really, really tough. You know, they're definitely more than a match for a lot of the equivalent Elven units, which is a bit of a change of pace considering most of Angband's units are more reliant on numbers and sort of their industrial crafts to sort of even the playing field a little bit against the elves of the mod. And finally some Spear Guard of the Iron Crown, which are obviously not armor piercing but very heavily armored and anti-cavalry as well. He does have some Valar Alcar over here, so like I said, they have different counters to the Trolls. They're capable of doing much more damage than the Trolls very quickly, of course, but they do have more counters, to be fair, the Elephants, so they are actually probably slightly more difficult to use, I would say, but their ceiling, their potential is far higher as well, and a couple more of the Iron Crown units as well. Then, the player who we're technically going to be seeing the battle from the perspective of today is going to be Fingolfin, played by Demetrios, and I would say Fingolfin all round are probably the strongest faction in Silmarillion at the moment, because while you can say that Finarfin are better at being defensive and Angband are better at being aggressive, Fingolfin can do both of those things, and yeah, they're very, very well rounded, I would say. He's got some Lancers of Anon in Galith, which are a very good unit of relatively lightly armoured, sort of lower defence cavalry, but they are very quick and they do have a very nice charge, so if you can utilise them well, while they may not be quite so forgiving to use as Feanor's examples, of course, as in Fingolfin you're not quite as reliant on that one unit of cavalry to do the business. Meanwhile here in the middle, the frame rate seems a little bit choppy there, but hopefully that doesn't persist later on in the battle. Here on the island he's got some Herdsmen of Dorloman, which are a really, really good entry-level spear unit, to be honest with you. They don't have a lot of killing power, but their ability to hold the line, especially in shield wall formation, as I've seen, is very, very impressive, to be honest with you. The Edain auxiliaries can definitely do a good job for Fingolfin, but of course you're going to be reliant on the Elven units to do the damage, stuff like the Bladesmen of Barad Aithel. Really, really good unit of line infantry this, very nice melee defense, good base damage as well. Several units of them along the front. Of course, one of two units to have pikes. The Sentries of Hithlum are not as strong by far as the Finarfin pikemen, but just the fact they're the only other pikes in the game gives them a really, really solid front line. Definitely makes a big, big difference to how effective Fingolfin can be, and he has got a lot of them here backing up the Bladesmen. Classic front line that. Herdsmen of Hithlum in behind. They don't have a lot of ammunition at range, these guys, but they do double as armor-piercing shock troops, albeit rather basic armor-piercing shock troops in melee, but it does give you a bit of AP bite, and in melee, if you're going to go for AP, you do need to rely on your Edain to do that. The Herdsmen of Hithlum being one such unit, but they have another unit, which I'm sure we'll be seeing in just a moment, that is even more the case for. Armatar of Barad Aithel are a half-strength, or half-strength in terms of numbers anyway, version of the Bladesmen. They also have a morale boosting capability. They're sort of a support unit for your front line, if you will. Think the Knights of the Silver Swan over in Reforged. They perform a very similar role, albeit they're not multiple HP, but they are Elven quality. Blade Masters, so this is the shock infantry version, of course, heavy swordsman, big melee defense, and big base damage. Also got a couple of units of the Marines of Vinyamar for javelins, and finally, actually, it doesn't look like we're going to be seeing the Sons of Hurin, which is probably the first time I've seen Fingolfin omit the Sons of Hurin from their roster. They have gone for the Herumatar as well, which is the sort of two-handed sword version of the support unit we've already seen, but no, Sons of Hurin is an interesting one because of how brutal they can be with their AP damage. His General's Bodyguard instead is the Irimo Arantar, which is a far tankier unit, to be fair, sword and board bodyguard unit, Fingolfin himself going to be marching with his men. Then, moving on, we have Doria, played by Butcher47. He's got some Axeman of the Girdle, so some nice throwing axes there, relatively lightly armoured. The Girdle units are, they are the lightest troops that Doriath have. The Region units, which you can see over here, are a little bit more resilient. Well, a lot more resilient from the front with those big shields, with the shield bearers, the spear version. It is worth saying, though, that Doriath, they don't pack on the armour or the defensive values that many of their elven cousins do in Fingolfin, Feanor and Finarfin. They're much more about being on the front foot and being aggressive in melee and out-damaging their opponent, which definitely bears fruit in certain cases because they are really, really damaging against their elven cousins that like to dip into that armour a little bit more, perhaps. Not so much in the shield bearers. They're probably the most defensive unit of infantry Doriath have, to be fair, but a very fine one at least. They can at least perform the same role as some of the heavier armoured units from their fellow elven cousins. We've got some Tyrande Lysdannen, which are an armour-piercing axe thrower unit with high mass projectiles as well, sending units flying. A very, very useful unit if you can get them into the right position, but they aren't quite as bulky and their range isn't quite as good as a lot of other units of this type, so it is a little bit glass cannon-esque, but you should be quite used to that if you like playing as Doriath, because they are a little bit more that way inclined than a lot of the other elven factions in the game. Maybe not quite so much as Ossiriand, but we'll get onto them in a moment. Warriors of Region, this is really the party piece that Doriath brings to the field, a unit of heavy armour-piercing axe shock infantry unit. A lot of the other elven factions prefer a sword, Doriath prefer an axe, and the armour-piercing that provides them is incredibly useful against many factions, to be honest with you. He's got a lot of them. Weak to arrow fire, though, it is worth saying. Doriath's armour slightly lower than a few of the other elven factions, like I said. Without a shield as well, that can leave them being a very obvious target for enemy skirmishers. More Axemen of the Girdle, more shield bearers. We've got some Donath and Mablung over here, the Fists of Mablung, a bodyguard unit which again is an AP shock troop. They're kind of like a more defensible version of the Sons of Hurin in many ways. I think the Sons of Hurin tend to... I've seen them perform better than the Donath, to be honest with you. But as it goes to folding into Doriath's roster, I mean, the Donath can just add even more AP damage with those huge Great Maces that they wield. Although there was talk about their Great Maces being replaced by sort of elven axes, which I do actually quite like, but we'll see if that comes to pass. Axe Guard of Region, so there is some line infantry. Their shields are not quite as big as the sword host in front of them, but of course swords, a little bit more defensive, keep themselves alive a little bit better. Axe Guard, a little bit better at getting some killing done. Then we have a personal favourite of mine. I'm dreadful at playing as them, to be honest with you, because of their similarities to Linden, and I'm not very good with them over at Reforged either. But the Falathrim, the Elves of the Falas, played by Wally Wolf, Marksmen of Balar, they have a real... I could talk about the Falathrim for quite a while, to be honest with you, but I'm not going to on this occasion because there's a lot I could say about them. The Marksmen of Balar are the heavy archers, so if you want to skirmish with the enemy, this is the way you want to go. There are very few archers in the game, to be honest with you, that would skirmish with these guys effectively at all, to be honest with you. Perhaps only the fully upgraded Archers of Amrod would be a better choice in terms of just being that heavy archer that you want to use. Marines of Eglarest, a spear javelin hybrid, a medium tier unit. The Eglarests are the medium tier. The Brythombar units here, the Rangers, but also any Brythombar class units are the lighter infantry for the Falathrim. And then you have sort of the Noldor units of varying names, which are the heavy units. So he's got some Rangers, some Marksmen, some Javelins. In behind them, he has got some Warriors of Eglarest, which is sort of the medium line infantry that you can bring. If you don't want to stump up the extra for sort of really going into your heavier Noldor units, then this is the your other best bet, really. And they'll outperform quite a lot, to be fair. Very, very good, especially at mopping up the more basic units of Orcs. The Arain Ephedune are the only multiple HP unit that the Falathrim have available to them. Bodyguard spears, very, very heavy spears as well. Probably one of the most defensive units in the game in terms of keeping themselves alive. He has also brought the Mariners of Erendil, which are of course the legendary company. The sort of upped version of the Warriors of Eglarest in front of them. They've got anti-elephant damage, they've got significant stats boosts, and they boost the morale of nearby units. But I think what the Falathrim can do very, very well is form up a really nice defensive line with their Aran Kielim and their Nobles of Balar. It might not be as easy to use or as effective as something that Finarfin can do, and I do think the Falathrim and Finarfin have some similarities. The Finarfin is just a little bit easier to execute with, whereas the Falathrim do have a little bit more tactical flexibility. But yeah, very heavy Noldor units there, and also a unit of Scouts of Eglarest, a unit of sword cavalry which can be used just to sort of dance around the field and be a little bit more defensive. Across the way, across the river, going to be Viper Action playing as Ossiriand, which they are the guerrilla warfare faction really in Silmarillion as it stands. If you like to kite people, if you like to try and pull them apart that way and go for the sort of long approach to games, then Ossiriand might be right up your alley, I should say, not ally. But the Spear Host of Rathloriel here, a unit of basic spears. Ossiriand don't really have a unit of sort of sword or axe line infantry as such that you can mass up easily. They do have some of those units, but they're sort of higher tier and you can't bring them in as many numbers. So if you want a more basic unit, then the Spear Host of Rathloriel are effectively Ossiriand's line infantry unit, which means that obviously less damage, but perhaps even more defensive merit to them. Kinsmen of Denethor are the legendary company for Ossiriand. Unlike a few other legendary companies, they are a detachment, so you can actually bring two to make up a full unit. They're sort of more bulkier spears in many ways, and you can use them. They are intended to be a supporting unit, similar to the Armitar and Herumatar of Barad Aethel, which is why I'm a little bit iffy on the fact that, to be honest with you, they're not considered the legendary companies of Fingolfin, seeing as that's pretty much exactly what the Kinsmen of Denethor offer Ossiriand as well, but it effectively gives Fingolfin 2 legendary companies when you consider they also have the Arqueni Findicano. But again, that's me nitpicking really. Spear Host of Rathloriel, here is the line infantry, and very similar actually to the Aran Kialim, the Mythern and TOL GALEN, because they're very expensive, but for very good reason, because you can bring 2 of them before the cost increases, but they're very, very good. They're also armour piercing, pound for pound, really one of the scarier units of line infantry in the game, but of course, Ossiriand are one of those factions which has less use for a sort of dedicated line in general. In many ways, you want to try and be a little bit more fluid, especially if you can try and pick apart a more lightly armoured faction in their bulk anyway, like the Falathrim. Earthen End Tower, heavy axemen with archers with heavy axes. Very good unit. Probably all around, if you want to sort of sum up the strengths of Ossiriand, the Earthen End Tower are probably the best unit to pick on there. Skirmishers of Rathloriel, they'll do a decent job in melee once their ammunition is out, but of course, like most of Ossiriand's roster, first and foremost, they are going to be ranged units, and then the Hunters of Rathloriel are the Javelin version. I'd be really surprised not to see several Galleon units, Scouts of Galleon, and the Riders of Galleon as well, but we shall see. General Artorius is here backing Ossiriand up, the other sort of lighter faction in terms of their armour values in the game, the Dominion of TOL and Gaurhoth, although they're not quite as reliant on the guerrilla warfare tactics that Ossiriand are because of their more disposable nature. Scarahai Trappers with their AP missiles here, which will be useful against the Noldor that the Falathrim are sort of going to send their way. The Gijak Scaraz to help hold the line, lots of Hishtbukraz warband, just to sort of pad out the army, bulk it out a bit. More Gijak Scaraz chosen, some Scarahai Blood Drinkers, again AP, really nasty charge on the Blood Drinkers as well. They're a deceptively damaging unit if you allow them to get a clean charge, but if you don't, then obviously their lighter melee defense and armor values will make them suffer pretty quickly. Laug Scaraz, a very numerous and very cheap unit of wargs, but obviously the quality isn't quite there. They'll be able to defeat very little in straight up melee, unless you can sort of really make use of the wraparound that bigger units like that can have. 2 Mangonels, so I mean it's going to force the hand of the Falathrim very quickly to make a decision whether to pull back a little bit or to charge forward into the welcoming arms probably of an Ossiriand ambush, so I quite like the way that TOL and Gaurhoth and Ossiriand have set the table here. Ash Priests with their fire bombs and hugely damaging armor-piercing axes. More Laug Scaraz, so a lot of the lighter wargs, and then the Wolf Guard are back here as well. The TOL and Gaurhoth variant of that heavy macemen unit that the Orcs traffic in. But yeah, not a bad decision there, I don't think. Then we have Steward of Dale playing as the Easterlings. Lothlin. Again, the Easterlings are another lighter faction, but unlike TOL and Gaurhoth, and certainly Ossiriand, I would say the Easterlings have got more to offer in terms of being a more solid faction because of all their Lothlin units. Horns of Lothlin and a spear version. Easteron Horsemen are going to make their way over here, so the red team really front-loading on that side, but he is also going to contest the middle island with Fingolfin, which is bold, because Fingolfin are very, very strong, of course. Marauders of Himring, I think that's the name. I'm going to keep calling it Heimring, because Heimring sounds more correct, if that makes sense, but it could very well be Himring, I'm not sure. Ravages of Heimring as well, obviously the basic entry-level Falxes, which will do pretty well against the Edain Auxiliaries, but they'll probably bounce right off of the Elven Line Infantry. Salamandrine Guard as well, with their morale shredding capabilities that they have with their fire arrows. Chieftain's Honor Guard, the general, very, very tanky unit of Line Infantry, that not quite as tanky, I don't think, as the Iremo Arantar because of the melee defense. But I think the armour actually may very well draw them to be very, very similar in terms of their qualities. Warband of Lothlin, obviously the closest thing they have to a fodder unit. The Easterlings, more Ravagers, and then a really nasty Lothlin frontline as well between the Clangar and the Halberdiers. Normally I would really like this, but considering the Edain Pikes that Fingolfin have, it's probably not going to be quite as efficient as the Easterlings would hope, but the AP could still be very useful. And finally, we have some more Easterlings actually, some Wardens and some Eastrons. But finally over here, we do have Eclipse, the map maker. He is going to be playing as Finarfin, the most defensive of all the factions in the game. They have no cavalry, but that doesn't really stop them from being a powerhouse because of how good they are at holding a position. 2 units of Swordsmen of Talath-Din, and they have, very similar to sort of Roman infantry, they throw a javelin, and then they sort of get ready for the melee engagement. It's not an armor-piercing javelin, so the damage it does is going to be fairly limited against certain targets, but it's enough to sort of soften them up for the kill. The detachment actually, rather confusingly, does have armor-piercing though, so do bear that in mind, but the ammunition is still rather limited. Archers of Talathdinin, Wardens of Nargothrond are over here as well, an armor-piercing spear. Really, really good frontline unit, to be honest. A detachment of them as well. And naturally, it wouldn't be a Finarfin army without the bridge wards. You can always count on the fact that the Finarfin are going to bring the bridge wards, perhaps more so than any other unit in the game. If Finarfin don't bring them, they're really only actively hampering themselves. Arqueni, Mormagilwa as well, Knights of the Black Sword, and another unit of Wardens. So, that was a bit lengthy, but without further ado, let's begin. Fairly long battle this as well, which is quite interesting for a more open one, but it has more in common with the siege in many ways, because, again, it's going to be lots of positions that people have to take up. It's not going to be just a wide open plain where getting around the enemy is the primary concern. It is going to be a case of... Oh, I do wonder as well, like over here I think is where decisions are going to have to be made pretty quickly. You can see the Hishbukraz Hunters are moving forward, Spear Host of Rathloriel are moving also to guard the crossing, and also some bandits, which is quite interesting. Really? I don't know how they managed to filter their way into the game. They shouldn't be a part of Ossiriand, surely. Well, they're going to get ripped apart by most of the units that they're going to be in contact with, but, well, I mean, I guess it gives them a little bit of an extra unit, I suppose. And that technically is a line infantry unit, but, I mean, it's line infantry in the way that Orc Trash tier units are line infantry. Here we can see some scouts of GALEN. Again, very lightly armoured, but you can bring a lot of them. It's sort of like the Mirkwood school of skirmishing with your enemy, that are sort of lightly armoured but damaging archer that you can bring in great numbers. I also forgot the Ents, which is rather interesting. Very similar to the Valor Alcar, really. Performing the same sort of role. Elephant tier units. What have we got here? Rangers of Brathambar who are firing. And the Mangonels are moving forward. I mean, I'd be really worried, actually, if I were the Falathrim on this occasion, because I do think that Ossiriand and TOL and Gaurhoth have put a good amount of thought into what they're going to do here. They've got a lot of archers that they can use to bombard you as you cross, which, especially for the Brathambar units, is not going to be good at all. And you can see here that the Rangers of Brathambar are immediately going to start suffering, because while the Scouts of GALEN are lightly armoured, so too are the Rangers of Brathambar. They're a unit which, to be honest with you, I would only see myself with the Falathrim using them in the late game, because if you use them in this situation here, it's going to be a problem for you. But it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I think the only way that the Falathrim can win this game is by choosing to not play it, actually, and by them and Doriath pulling back and maybe not choosing to cross this river at all, because I think that Ossiriand with their archer power, and TOL and Gaurhoth as well with their artillery, are going to be too much to deal with. Meanwhile, Eastron Horsemen and Salamandrine Guard firing on Fingolfin as they move forward. They should definitely be looking to go after the Sentries of Hithlum, because if they can do sufficient damage to the Sentries of Hithlum, all of a sudden the Lothland Halberdiers will prove to be much more of a concern for a lot of these up-close and personal units of Elven line infantry. Herdsmen of Hithlum are taking a few shots, but again, they may be AP in melee, but their ammunition is limited. I wouldn't be as worried about them. I would definitely be going for, yeah, Sentries of Hithlum, that's more like it. Flaming shot coming in, they're shaken, but don't read too much into that. The Salamandrine Guard will always make a unit shaken when they fire their projectiles into them, but unless the army is already looking like it might be in a substantial amount of trouble, it's not going to be a huge problem. You can see over here the Angband being given free rein. I mean, this is what I think the blue team should be doing over on the other side. Finarfin has taken a look at Angband, knows that if they move into them, stuff like the crossbows are going to have a huge advantage when it comes to dealing with them on the river crossings. So they're just choosing to pull back, and they're going to go onto the middle island where the battlefield is smaller and where their pikes are more likely to have a bigger impact. Mangonels are still choosing not to fire at the moment. I mean, he's got two of them, to be fair, so he can afford to take his time. But they are going to force TOL and Gaurhoth, I think, to use the Mangonels, because I think already they can see that just marching across the river is not going to net them the result they want. The Brathambar units and even the Eglarest units are going to get picked apart by those Ossiriand archers, especially if the Randirim were hidden somewhere. But also Doriath. I mean, Doriath aren't exactly known for being the tankiest faction on the block. If this was Feanor, you could maybe get away with putting some archers of Amrod on the riverbank, pushing forward some upgraded footmen of Amras. Maybe that would work, but then there are Scarahide trappers, I would assume, nearby, or close enough that it's going to prove to be a problem. It's really not an appealing prospect to cross that river, which is part of the reason why I would honestly maybe say just leave. There's a huge amount of units which have just popped in there from House Finarfin, which were hidden. Stalkers of Tor and Faroth, and a whole bunch of bandits as well. I don't know how the bandits have shown up. I guess they put it onto an all-time period, and the bandits revealed themselves. I mean, as far as an ambush goes, I mean, it would have been a fairly effective ambush had it not been for the fact that it is a large portion of the Angband army. Like, it's pretty much an entire army which would roll over a small wing of the force like this. Meanwhile, we do have an immediate fight here in the middle. A huge line battle as well between the Easterlings and Fingolfin. In a straight up fight between these two on the front line, I would back Fingolfin 9 times out of 10 because they have the pike support, and in close melee, the Bravdon units should give them the edge. But I have to say, the support coming in here from stuff like the Marauders is doing quite well. I mean, I do think that a large portion of that is some units are being held up by sort of sacrificial wings of the army, like the Warband here. You can see their throwing axes coming in, going after the right kind of targets as well. The unshielded Blade Masters of Bravdon, I like that. And yeah, I mean, I would say that Fingolfin have, for the most part, got the advantage in an engagement like this, but it does matter how you play, and I think that the Easterlings have set the table really very nicely, actually. They also have some skirmishers on the high ground over there. One problem they're going to have to deal with, however, is that the Valor-Aukar are over here. But having said that, the Valor-Aukar have taken a loss already, I think, at the hands of the Salamanders. We can also see there that Angband are also going to be swinging around the flank. If the Easterlings don't have anything to sort of stop this, then the good positioning elsewhere is going to count for, I think, very, very little. Eastron Horsemen are shooting the Valor-Aukar. They're a big target, so most of those arrows will hit. And in fact, the damage they've already taken at the Salamanders means that Valor-Aukar has fallen at the hands of these lowly horse archers. Very, very nice. I mean, Finarfin are on their way forward now to try and plug this gap, which is required pretty quickly, I think. Otherwise, we could start to see the Easterling morale collapse really rather quickly, which would be a shame, because I think for the most part they've actually set themselves up really rather well. Marines of Vinyamar doing horrendous damage to those Marauders. And you can see over on this side the Chieftain's Honour Guard really being overloaded. So over on this side it's going quite well for the blue team. Elsewhere on the line though, it's going pretty well for the Easterlings. You can see the longer this battle goes on, those Valor-Aukar just... a lot of those units will get back up, but some of them won't, and the disruption it's causing is serious. But as soon as the Fingolfin line gets set, as soon as the chaos sort of abates, that's when Fingolfin really start to come back into play. And the Easterlings, especially with some of their more basic Heimerring units, are going to start to struggle here. Over here as well, like the Lothlin units are really very, very good for their class, but they're not going to be a match for the Bravdon, especially the sort of legendary company variants of them. Axemen of the Girdle are also coming in from behind this time, so Doriath have also got some units over here, and I think it's well thought out by the blue team, this combined forces of Doriath and Angband coming to the aid of Fingolfin, who's taking on the lion's share of the work and the casualties. Another volley coming in there for the Marines of Vinyamar, going after the freshly arrived Finarfin army. And I think now is probably the time, to be honest with you, for something like the Mangonel to start grilling the Falathrim. Again, there's no huge blobs of infantry. There's a few deaths back here, which would imply that at least one Mangonel volley has been forthcoming. But I mean, this is good for the Falathrim and for Doriath's main army as well, if they can just stay here quite happily. The red team are putting all their eggs into 2 baskets, whereas the blue team being a little bit more free-flowing. Now, a lot of that will, whether that's successful or not, will I think come down quite a lot to how well they do here in the middle. And you can actually see that TOL and Gaurhoth are over here with their Laugskarars. It's going to be interesting to see if they perform all that well here. They could punch through and go after the Jabbies, but I'm not sure whether that's going to be a terribly good idea, considering there's pikes on the front line and they could get wrapped up in them. But yeah, the Chieftain's Honour Guard, I mean, it's an even fight now. You can see over here the Spear Guard of the Iron Crown are pushing forward, trying to stop the archers of Talath-Din from firing in. And they will be able to push through this one unit of Talath-Din and swordsmen pretty quickly. I mean, the Wargs are going to try and stop this. Guardians of the Iron Crown are here. Charging into the Guardians is not quite so bad, but if you charge into the Spear Guard, you better make sure they're pointing the wrong way, otherwise the Light Walks in particular are going to die pretty fast. Yeah, Fingolfin are going to win over on this side, but with these Wargs buzzing around and with some of the range support coming in from Finarfin, could be all good, but you can see the main body of the Angband army, unopposed, is going to be able to go around to the back. And really it's only the ambush wing of the Finarfin army that's back here. I'm not quite sure how they're going to deal with that, to be honest with you. I mean, if it's just a tactic to sort of buy time and delay, I'm not sure how useful that's going to be, because it's already been pretty, you can see in there, it's pretty grisly, some pretty grisly Halloween-esque assets that have been added recently. But you can see here Marauders of Heimerring struggling on the front line, as you would expect. Scouts of Eglarast are over here now as well, backing up the blue team force, as well as the Lance of Anon in Galith. I think that was to stop Eastron horsemen from roaming around back here, which is very easily done between those two units of Elven Cav. But it will also mean that even if the Laubscaraz do get in behind enemy lines, it's going to be fairly difficult for them to have much of an impact, because all the units they have are going to have a good amount of strength. But the Easterlings breaking through the middle, so very much differing fortunes along different parts of the line. The Easterlings and Fingolfin are really tearing lumps out of one another. A bit of support coming in from their allies. I think the more of a presence Finarfin start to have in this fight, with their Nargothrond units in particular, the more pressure that's going to put on Fingolfin to be the ones to keep this fight going over here, because again, it's pretty much the main body of the Finarfin army coming over here. There goes Fingolfin at the hands of the AP of the Wardens of Nargothrond. I mean, the Troll Guard are moving forward, Eclipse is moving back yet further. Skirmishers of Rathloriel are coming over. I mean, this is interesting. What if Angband decides instead not to bother going to the middle island because they know Finarfin are there, and instead go to this area over here? More and more is actually being siphoned off by Ossiriand and the like, so eventually they could end up with not enough over here on these riverbanks over here to stop a full advance from the Falathrim and Doria. So I do think it is interesting, this. I think the red team are probably the ones at this point that need to figure something out and sort of seize the initiative in some sense on the battlefield. They could do it here, because it does look as though this side of the Fingolfin army is completely collapsing. The Irimo Arantar are actually, you know, straight up running away at this point, which is something you don't often see from them. Sentries of Hithlum. You can see over here the Lances of Anon in Galith as well. I mean, they need to sort of choose a place to stand and fight here, Fingolfin, because there really is no backing away from this at this point. You've gone all in. You can't decide not to go all in after you've already laid your cards on the table. That's against the rules, I'm afraid, and yeah, it has coincided really with more and more of Finarfin's presence on the front line, and the fact that the support Fingolfin got was sort of more limited, I would say. A few units here and there, you can see a bit of the Doriath army was over here, but the Arqueni Mormagilwa, the Knights of the Black Sword, I think that is Turin himself actually. They are going to get charged in the back by Scouts of Eglarast, but I mean, Arqueni, they're going to turn around, and so too are Wardens of Nargothrond. Cavalry, you need to charge them in and out very, very quickly, really, for that to be efficient. But yeah, Shield Bearers of Region. When it comes to being heavy spears, Finarfin have got the beating of Doriath, I'm afraid, and especially with the backup of the Knights of the Black Sword. Interesting to see how much of an impact that cavalry actually has. Still not much movement further downstream. But yes, I think, especially in a more claustrophobic environment like this central island, it definitely does suit Finarfin. It also suits, to be fair, the large amount of halberdiers and Lothland units that the Easterlings brought. Much more solid, and I think it's not really too surprising to see that most of the Heimerring units and the Falksmen, axe throwers and the like, all perished rather quickly over here, whereas the Lothland units are still standing, albeit even they are quite depleted. Laubscaraz are moving forward, so yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see really how much damage Fingolfin managed to do over here, because they have ultimately ended up losing the Middle Island, and I don't really think that's too much to do with Fingolfin as such. I mean, they didn't do anything dreadfully wrong that I could see. Maybe there was some horrendous plays going on underneath the tree cover, but to be honest, they moved forward, they set up their front line. There was some flanking going on as well from Angband and a little bit from Doria. Nothing too wrong there, it just came down to more was committed here from the red team, and considering the kind of units that it was always going to be hard for Fingolfin on this occasion. They were going after the right targets as well. Focusing down the sentries of Hithlum was the key to making this force ultimately fall by the wayside. Swordsmen of Taloth Dionin are moving forwards. More of these wargs. Obviously they're on the same team, but they're just trying to hunt down what little remains. I mean, the Irimo Arantar are kind of still standing, but they are broken and fighting to the death. And that's pretty much going to be that at this point. They still have their Lancers of Anon in Galith, but at this point all they can do is be a little bit of a supporting force to the Falathrim and to Doriath. And at this point I would say the red team, I said they needed to seize momentum in this fight, and they have, because I was a little bit worried that if they were to stagnate, eventually the blue team would have what they need to move forward. But now of course they don't. The Mangonels are still over. I haven't seen the Mangonel actually fire as of yet, which is perhaps slightly concerning for them, but also the blue team are now very, very far apart from one another. The Falathrim and Doriath are here in the south of the map, the vast majority of their forces, with what very little remains, of course, of Fingolfin, and Angband are all the way up here in the north. Captain Gervais kind of alone, and that gives a little bit of an interesting dilemma for the red team, because if you can, what you want to do is try and focus down one of these two areas first, but not so much that you leave the door open for the side that you're not focusing on to go forward on the attack and do some damage from behind. So who do you go after? If you're going to go after Angband, even though they're only one army, you'll need a lot of numbers, because of course Angband themselves are capable of filling the battlefield a lot, and it's not as if they have units which are not going to be capable of sort of holding their own. Iron Shot Halberds in particular, the Bulldogs are here, they've got Trolls, Iron Crown units. Really not fertile grounds for Ossiriand, I would say, because a lot of the arrow fire is going to be mitigated by the huge shields and thick black plate armour, especially of the Iron Crown units. Meanwhile, you still see over here a small pocket of resistance, a very small pocket of resistance, the Shield Bearers of Ravages being slowly ripped apart, like we said, by the wing of the Finarfin army that's over here. And there they go. Finished. This also means Doriath and the Falathrim are going to have to try and divide their attention between two front lines. They probably do need slightly less over here though, because Finarfin, and especially the Easterlings, I would say, have obviously been, they have taken damage going through Fingolfin in the way that they did. Whereas, like, TOL and Gaurhoth, like, none of their infantry really has been damaged at this point. Same could be said of Ossiriand, but they tend to bring less infantry anyway, it's more skirmishes for them. Mangonel in position now. They're going to try and mitigate that damage somewhat by having the shielded spear host in there. But the Wardens of Lothland will probably be slightly better at doing that. Mangonel, let's see if it can do the damage then, because if it does, the red team, I fail to see how the blue team can come back if the Mangonel really does the business here. That is a nice and fortuitous hit as well, levelling quite a few of these Axe Guard of Ravages, which would be really, really good, to be honest with you, against the TOL and Gaurhoth infantry in particular, because of their low melee defense as well as their low armour. They're capable of racking up a kill count against that kind of force very, very quickly. Thin lines, so to be fair, they're doing the right thing against artillery, but it can be a bit of RNG involved there, just depending on how the Mangonel decides to treat you. In the scenario, which hopefully we will see at a later date, my word was there a lot of friendly fire and kills on the opposition team as well. It was like breaking even. Units routing left, right and centre. It was marvellous. And hopefully we will see it soon. GALEN are here. I mean, they've got a lot of good units on the front line, to be fair. My main concern at this point, of course, is that if it does become just about all about that melee force, the bridge wards are going to be fairly dominant. They are getting focused down though. Ranges of Bravdon firing in there. They've got significantly better armour than the sentries of Hithlum, but they will still fall under sustained arrow fire. They're moving forward here, which I think is actually kind of a bold move. If they're going to do that, I would say they probably need to move forward over here as well, sort of put up a unified front. Mangonel is still firing. I'm a little bit surprised we didn't see the Mangonel establish itself earlier. If it had, the blue team would already, I think, be feeling real pressure. And yeah, a little bit of a grilling for the Tier End Lysdannen and for the Warriors of Ravages as well. So again, Doriath taking the vast majority of the damage there. Interesting to see what's going on in the north as well. What have we got here? Scouts of GALEN? Don't know where on earth they're going. They look like they still have ammunition. I mean, they're going to get charged down here by the Trolls. So, I mean, Ossiriand are pretty light on their feet. They're pretty quick. Shouldn't have too much to worry about. There's also some of the TOL and Gaurhoth Laugskaraz moving up here as well to give it a little bit of backup. I'm really surprised, honestly, they decided that some of the Ossiriand archers should come over here. I mean, I guess the Mythern and TOL GALEN is a good choice over here. AP. will be at its most useful against Angband, I would suggest. This, though, real humdinger of a fight going on over here. You would think the bridge wards would be enough to sort of tilt this fight in favour of this army over here. They're taking some shots in the side by some rangers. I mean, they're fairly basic as far as archers go, but it's better than nothing. Axemen of the Girdle are in behind. It really just comes down to who has the mass on this line to really see them through. I mean, I still think that because Finarfin have got a fairly healthy amount of pikes in here, unless they can affect the fight in other ways, like with the Axemen, for example, I would back Finarfin and the Easterlings keep moving forward. The Easterlings, of course, have got those halberds in there as well, whereas there's no such luck in terms of polearm units for either Doriath or the Falathrim over here. They don't even have their nobles of Balar, do they? I think they're still over guarding that river crossing, which could be construed as a bit of an error. Swordsmen of Talathin, and I mean, you can see the Axemen are getting onto the side now, so I mean, it is going to be interesting. Mariners of Erendil as well will make it so that at least the Falathrim part of this army is almost certain not to break until the fight becomes untenable. Yeah, it is interesting, this. I mean, they've got their axe throwers into a good position. They're not going to be able to target the pikes all that easily, but they will be able to do a lot of damage to the clan guard of Lothland and the wardens of Nargothrond, which, I mean, you'd have to say that's not... If you were offered to kill those units, you would definitely take it if you were the blue team here. It'll be an interesting test, this as well, of how resilient the Falathrim and Doriath are on the front line, because neither one of them are really known for being that sort of powerhouse of a faction which stays standing no matter what. The Falathrim have got elements of their army that are like that, but for the most part they're a little bit more about combined arms, and Doriath are a bit more about the damage rather than survivability. Although a unit that combines both is most certainly the Donath. And to be fair, I mean, if the pikes and halberds are not going to be sufficient to do this for Finarfin and the Easterlings, which the game seems to think they will be, but if they're not, they could be in real trouble here, because like this assault could go horribly, horribly wrong for them. I'm not entirely sure what they intend on doing here in the north. Scouts of GALEN are firing. If I were Gervais, honestly, I would probably move forward. I mean, you've got a few units over here from Finarfin and the like, but more of them I think are going to be siphoned off. Skirmishers of Rathloriel heading down that way. I think you could swallow this army whole, because they've got so much infantry over here. It's not really... I mean, there's Scarahai trappers. It's an awkward force to face, I would say, because there's enough infantry over here to the point where you can't roll over them without effort. They've got enough skirmishers over here that you're likely to take a lot of damage on the approach, but I don't think you have a lot of choice, because if you just sit back, you are ultimately going to allow a unit like the Scouts of GALEN to do decently, although it looks like they just ran out of ammo. So I am quite interested to see what he does here, because he is in danger potentially of being left behind a little bit in this battle. It could be that it's decided maybe in his team's favour before he's really had chance to get stuck in. But it could also be determined to be going against his team, depending on how well the Falathrim and Doriath do here in the south. And it is looking like the bridge wards are doing the business on the front line, at least for the moment. More and more units are coming in around Keelim, but it's more of a numbers game at this point. They don't really have a sort of dedicated unit for dealing. I mean, the Tyrann Lysdannen would be. I did sort of observe on the Discord that he was the Doriath player, Butcher47, who was a little bit frustrated with his Tyrann Lysdannen, and I would imagine this is the moment he got frustrated at, because technically his own units are in the way, and the Tyrann Lysdannen have a little bit of a tough time throwing over their own units, so he may have to make do. Yeah, you can see there the green trails denoting an armor-piercing projectile. So yeah, he's going to have to make do with hitting maybe not the prime target on the line, which would be centre mass, but it's better to hit something than nothing at this point, because you're definitely going to need that support. And the archers are at least hitting the bit that you want, the marksmen of Balar over here. Meanwhile, Mangonels still just sort of sat there. I mean, he's still got these two Mangonels. More and more units are being sent off that way now. I think they're probably... looks like they're going to get ready for an assault on Angband to try and do that. I mean, as soon as you feel confident to charge across that river, as Doriath, I think you need to take it. Just because as soon as they've siphoned off enough, you do risk sort of running into a bit of a roadblock on this side of the river and then the Mangonels grilling your army, but it's a risk I personally would be willing to take. There's not that much over here anymore. There could be some hidden shenanigans from Ossiriand, but just having a little bit of map awareness, having a little bit of a look around most of Ossiriand's force. I mean, if there is an ambush over here, there's not much of it at all, because most of Ossiriand's army is here in the north, I think, getting ready to go after Angband. Angband is still allowing themselves to be held at arm's length, really. And I think there was a moment perhaps where the blue team could have really capitalised on this. If Angband had attacked slightly sooner, even if this force came to the north, that would have then been the cause to cross the river as well. And if the blue team do go on to lose this fight, I think we could maybe look at this as a pretty pivotal moment in the fight where they could have chosen to sort of seize the initiative and move forward, and they didn't decide to do it, and allowed the red team to sort of dictate the pace of the engagements, because it was the red team as well that decided to move forward here, and you have to say it hasn't worked out for them. Sheer weight of numbers has overridden the pikes in the end, and Doriath and the Falathrim combined damage of the heavier Doriath units and the Noldor from the Falathrim doing the business as well, which could be a real problem for the red team, of course, because they did commit a decent amount of units over here and it hasn't ended up working out in the end. Skirmishes of Rathlorellion. All this is going to do, I think, is sort of harden the red team's resolve, because the only thing they have to do at this point, they're not going to cross the river over here, you'd have to say. The Mangonels are just sort of waiting for the opportune moment to shoot into some blobs and hope that they can reap a bloody harvest. They've been forced off the central island. Well, the forces they've got sort of defending the central island are ultimately going to be finished off. There goes the Easterling general. Not that that matters too much, they're almost completely gone. Bridgewater's going to get defeated. Support coming in from there. But yeah, the only thing the red team can do at this point is try and flood forwards and kill off Angband. This is perhaps what Gervais was hoping for all along. It allows his black metal wall to try and hold the line. His trolls are going to do some big damage here to the scouts of GALEN. Actually no, those are stalkers. Assassin unit. Bandits moving forward. Scarahai, unfortunately they're not going to be able to get a charge off, which is a little bit of a because their own units are in the way, of course. Stalkers are moving forward as well. Ironshot Arbalists firing in. But yeah, they need to try and deal with Angband quickly here, because Doriath and the Falathrim loom at large, and if they can't deal with Angband quickly, the strength the blue team have left in the south of the map is going to be too much for them, I think. There goes the general of Finarfin. Jack Scaras are there, some strong horsemen. Yeah, they need to move forward with more than this, I think, the red team. I think perhaps the situation has developed quickly and they've had to move forward maybe before they were completely ready. But as a result, I think the only thing they've really done is made things slightly worse for themselves, because you can see they're dragging their heels a little bit. A large force from Ossiriand in particular is not quite ready, which is a shame, because the Ents would be useful. Ash Priest would be incredibly useful. Kinsman of Denethor to shore up the line. Wolfguard for the extra AP. Mythern for a lot more AP. And unfortunately they weren't quite ready for that, and I think this could be a fairly pivotal moment in this battle. It could be the moment, honestly, where the blue team go clear. Especially if the blue team in the south decide to move forward, and that looks like exactly what they're going to start to do. It's certainly what they should do. I mean, the marksmen of Balar are going to fire across the river. The amount of damage they do is going to be fairly limited, to be honest. Shield wall formation for the Wardens of Lothlin. Shield value. Bulky Easterling units. Going to absorb quite a bit of that damage. The crew is unshielded, but still well armoured, because of course it's the Mangonels come courtesy of Angband for TOL and Gaurhoth, so they're wearing the Angband armour. We do have two Mangonels, but again, like, this would be the moment really. Marines of Aglarest moving forward, soften them up with the javelins as soon as they feel as though they can smash this defence to bits quickly. You know the Doriath's going to come forward in a big way, as well as, of course, up here. All Angband need to do is hold on for a decent amount of time. Mythern are on the front line now, and to be fair, it's doing a lot of damage over on this side of things. I'm a little bit surprised, actually, that Gervais's line has sort of gotten out of shape so quickly. I was expecting him ultimately to fall, but I wasn't expecting the organisation to go out the window quite that fast, which may be the red team's salvation. I think it's a sign, honestly, that the Falathrim and Doriath probably need to hurry up a little bit, because the advantage is more and more likely to start disappearing the longer they take. Wretches, however, are holding the line over here against Skijak Skarath. The Ents are in the backfield, and they will continue to do horrid damage to the Ironshot Arbalists, so no support from them. They want to be a little bit careful around Halberds and Ravages, but Scarahai Trappers fighting hard with the support of the Scouts of GALEN in the background. There's still a centre to this army, but you can see it's pretty chaotic over here, which it's not often, but the chaos isn't going to favour the Orcs this time, because they were the ones that were being pressured. And their halberds are out of shape a little bit, so the Archers of Talath Daenin getting in there. The main unit they need to be concerned about, though, where are they? There they are. Mythern and TOL GALEN. Ossiriand, of course, they don't pack on the armour themselves, so certainly for an armour-piercing unit, this is going to be one that has good melee defence. So the natural melee counters that Angband have aren't really going to be as useful against them, and of course those maces are going to be devastating to Iron Crown units as well. Outriders of Dwylwen are back here, and yeah, I think the red team can actually afford to be fairly pleased with how this is going. Angband will take a little bit of time dying off. There's apparently still a unit over here. A red triangle still remains. A unit hiding, perhaps? Where are you? Or wherever they are not going to be all that significant, but the Falathrim and Doria moving forward here through the island. I think they do need to pick up the pace. I mean, certainly the red team know that I think they're going to get there. Meanwhile, over here, fire arrows coming forth from the Hishtbuk-Raz hunters. The Mangonel is going to start firing. It's a very limited window here that the Mangonels are going to have, the one Mangonel anyway, is going to have to actually do the business. You can tell they want to rout them because they're using the fire arrows and the Hishtbuk-Raz. Obviously that's not going to be enough to rout them on their own, but in conjunction with the Mangonel, it very well could be. Of course, it could also have the catastrophic effect of routing your own men. Oof. Yeah, I think it is going to rout their own men first, to be honest, but it will do damage. It will do damage. They're so densely packed, but I think this, ultimately, I think this is the right thing to do for the Falathrim and Doriath, because they can't afford to drag their heels much longer. Otherwise, the longer they wait, the more advantage the red team is going to gain in the north, because Angband is rather rapidly going to fall apart the more pressure they're put under. Their units are moving through the middle here, which is all well and good, but I think, yeah, the red team are really already sort of preparing for that eventuality. Some bandits and some spear hosts, that's obviously not going to be enough to stop the entirety of this force, but it's going to be enough to hold them in place long enough, I think, for Angband to be completely dealt with. Ironshod halberds. That, I believe, yeah, you can see the bulldogs there getting shredded, and yeah, that's enough to chain rout Angband. It does go to show how important generals are to the Orc factions in particular. As soon as they lose that, they can be in real trouble. You can see over here, though, the Ents have ultimately ended up falling to Ironshod halberds, which are pretty much the ideal counter to a unit of elephants like this, if they're in melee and if they can actually attack without getting kicked over, because they have huge anti-cavalry damage, which doubles as anti-elephant damage, of course, and armor piercing. So it certainly makes a lot of sense to me, really, that the Ents are dying. Well, actually, no, Angband are over here, so they haven't chain routed completely. Cowardly foe. I guess that must be the Easterlings then. They must be gone. And it makes a lot of sense because the Lothlin units probably got routed immediately by the Mangonel. And you have to say, I mean, they've done some damage to them crossing this river, but I think for the most part the blue team will probably be fairly happy with this because it gives them a whole nother wing of their army that they're going to be moving forward to the north there to deal with the red team, including some scary stuff as well, like the Orion Ephidun, the Aran Kielim, Warriors of Region, all in here. Whatever happened to the nobles of Balar? I guess they must be over here somewhere. This is the only place they can be, surely. Yeah, here they are. Looking worryingly fresh for the red team. So the Bulldogs were over here somewhere, I believe. Yes, here they are. Only two remain, of course. They will stand and fight to the bitter end. The Twisted Maiar, but a bitter end it shall be. More and more they're going to need to go over here, though, at this point, the red team, because they're going to need to block the advance, which I think more is going to be headed up by the Falathrim, to be honest with you. They've got the Aran Kielim, the Mariners of Arendil. There's a few Doriath units in here, but I actually think there's more Doriath units comprising the river crossing over there. But there are, of course, the very worrying Warriors of Eregion. They'll be really excellent against stuff like the Gijak Scaras. Yeah, I think the blue team are probably in the ascendancy here. If I had to pick a winner from here, I would go with the blue team. The only way I can see it turning around is if the red team take up a really nasty position, maybe on a river crossing, and they have sufficient support units. They've got Kinsmen of Denethor back here, very, very nice units. They look untouched, actually, which is interesting. So they'll be a useful unit to have in the late game. Yes, Angband are now gone, so Gervais was destroyed. He held on for about as long as could be expected in that position, though, I would say. Like, there's a lot of varied strengths coming at you there between Finarfin, Ossiriand and TOL and Gaurhoth all swarming over you. What works against one type of unit isn't going to work against another. That is certainly concerning, though. This was the unit that I was sort of worried about seeing pop up. The Randirim with their body-piercing projectiles. We all know how devastating Rangers can be, and this could be their way back into it, honestly. Rangers are so devastating that this could be the thing which flips the battle on its head, really. Doesn't matter, like, the Lim are incredibly good at dealing with missile damage because of their really thick armour and shields, but you just score so many hits with a unit of Rangers like that that eventually it's going to start to tell. And they took a lot of damage there, they really did. Hishbukraz Ash Priest as well are flinging their projectiles in from somewhere. There they are, going after the Warriors of Eglaras, going into the units that are in behind, as well as the Tiren Lysdanen. Wants to be a little bit careful here. They've got a lot of... I mean, this is what I said could be the issue for them. Range support. Between the Ash Priests and the Randirim, those are probably the two scariest ranged support units in the game. Not counting potential artillery strikes, but maybe the Uraloki. Although that kind of counts as like monstrous artillery, doesn't it, in many ways? Randirim repositioning themselves. They're continuing to move forward here, though, the Falathrim, undeterred by the Ash Priests. And they are going to take damage to their Nobles of Balar, but I mean, to be fair, there are no Bridgewards anymore, so in terms of a choke point fight, the Nobles of Balar are the most dominant unit left on the field. And of course, they still have this section of their army as well. Axguard, good Doriath units. Marksmen of Balar out of ammunition. I mean, they're still good in melee. Another unit of Aran Lim is over here, I think, as well, somewhere, but in particular the Arain Afadu. Yeah, there they are. So some good units over here as well. Not a huge army this, but it's something that the red team are going to have to, even if they end up outright winning here, which is going to be tough because there are still more reinforcements to be committed, another unit of nobles. It is going to come down to range support in the end. Scouts of GALEN, good shots there into the side. I think the Randim are out of ammunition now, actually, which is a shame for them. They still have some archers firing in. Yeah, it's going to be tough here. Like, this is the kind of fight which, if you have the ammunition left to do it, Ossiriand can be really, really good at. But considering the vast majority of the blue team are now made up of Ossiriand and TOL and Gaurhoth, a narrow, grindy choke point is not really what they do best. Ossiriand especially. It's not really what they do best. They've got really good melee defense when it comes to just that heavy-duty fight on the front line, especially considering the amount of Noldor that the Falathrim still have left. You would back them in this fight. Nobles of Balar and Aran Lim and Mariners of Arendelle all in tandem is going to be hard. And I mean, the Gijak Scaras are slightly more well built for this kind of thing, but even they are not going to do all that well. Don't know how much Mythern they've got left, but they're a relatively small unit anyway. You can't count on them to be all-encompassing on the front line. I think probably the Kinsmen of Denethor would not go amiss on that front line either. They need to do something at this point. But what can they do? I mean, they can try and go over here, I suppose. This corner of the map, which there are several crossings to get over here. I mean, I suppose this corner camping, it may be, but maybe this is the red team's best hope at this point. But it's hard to see how they can get all the way over there, because surely they're going to get blocked by the encroaching second wing of the Falathrim Doriath alliance, as it now is. Two factions on both teams are pretty much entirely gone. The Easterlings and Fingolfin grinding each other to death in the middle. And then also Angband and Finarfin also mostly gone. I think there might still be a couple. Yeah, I mean, there's still some Finarfin units, still some Stalkers. But again, even by Finarfin standards, these are their lighter units. Javelins coming in, doing some damage. It's hard to see at this point without a huge amount of range support units. It is really hard to see how they deal with that many Nobles of Balar. How the tables have turned on Finarfin. This is usually how they fill people with dread in the late game when they've got so many of their phalanx units still available to them. Perhaps not going to be the case this time though, with the Falathrim doing that instead. It's a smaller part of the army this, but I mean, even if they overwhelm this army, it's going to take some doing. There's some elite units in there. What do they do as well? Do they have, I mean, Blood Drinkers? Some AP. Decent AP. But it's, even in terms of the AP stakes, you would, and like straight up damage stakes, Doriath have got the edge, I would say, on TOL and Gaurhoth over here, unless maybe the Ash Priests have been moved over, but which they are being moved over. It is interesting. In fact, it's pretty much an entirely TOL and Gaurhoth force which has been sent over to deal with this, meaning they're going to be leaving Ossiriand to try and deal with the narrow choke, which they're probably the worst at doing. Scouts of GALEN with a good shot, but again, the damage they can cause is minimal in comparison to the devastation the Randirim can cause in a situation like this. Perfect shot for them. I mean, they'll do damage. And against the medium and lighter units, it might even have the desired effect, but again, there's just reinforcements back here. If it were just this, I would actually feel fairly confident for the red team, but there's another unit of nobles. There's some out-of-ammo marksmen that can be used to good effect as well. Nothing else, though. Still the Tyrande lies Danon, waiting. I think this is actually the moment where you're probably getting frustrated, because the axe throwers don't throw over the heads of their own men all that well. Which is perhaps for the best for the red team here. Marines of Aglarest also not having the best time as it pertains to that. What's going on here? Laugskaraz being chased down by, I think, a single scout. Well, no, the scout is actually routing. So the Laugskaraz are going to go around. 6 of them only, however. And with Arain Efdun, even if the line just turns around after it gets charged, you would imagine they'd be fine. Javelins coming in. It is a bold move, this, from TOL and Gaurhoth to try and make this work for them. I don't think, to be fair, I don't think they've got much of a choice. They need to be proactive here, otherwise they will just end up going out with a whimper and not a bang. So they're going to move forward. Of course, the Scarahai are really not going to enjoy being in melee with Axguard of Regia, and their lower melee defense is going to be ruthlessly exploited by the higher melee attack that the Axguard bring to the fore. Some good damage being done to those warriors, though. Marines of Aglarest pulling their spears out, so they could be used really to ward off any cavalry excursions. I mean, that's a decent sized unit of Outriders, but the Green Elf General falls. That is something that Ossiriand have against them as well. It's the fact that the Mythern and TOL GALEN tout themselves as being a bodyguard unit, but they're not multiple HP, which makes a huge difference. It's a humongous difference. It's one of the reasons why the 3 hit point units over in Reforged have such a leg up on the regular ones. It's why stuff like the Mithril Guard is so dominant in most fights, and the Pharazim Swordmasters, because that extra HP makes a massive difference. The melee defense and the armor piercing, I think, is not enough to make up for that either. I think as a unit they perform pretty much exactly the same role that the Aran Kialin do for the Falathrim, in the sense they fill a gap at the high tier, but I don't necessarily think they're uber tier. Like the Arain Efdun are a very different ballgame because of their extra hit point. It makes them incredibly tanky. Able to get around the side over here though, so I mean, they're gonna win over here, I think, the red team. All Wally Wolf needs to do here is just stretch his spears out nicely. It is worth being worried about the Outriders of Dweilwen, though, to be fair, because their charge can be very, very nasty. Much in the same way as most other Green Elf units, though, they can be a bit glass cannony. But yeah, over here, defeat seems certain. Kinsmen of Denethor being added to the front line having somewhat of an impact. I do wonder if the Kinsmen are armor piercing. I don't know if that's the case. If they are, I think that would make them a phenomenal unit, really, but it's been a long time since I've actually looked at Ossiriand's roster, since it was before the Kinsmen were actually added to them. If they are, that could have the impact they desire, but they're still going to win over here, the blue team, eventually. Skirmishes of Rathloril are here in the back. Question is, can they make it a real battle here in the late game by winning this fight over here? Outriders of Dweilwen taking losses, Arain Efdun being engaged by Stalkers, they will lose pretty quickly, but it gives the opening perhaps for this cavalry. The Outriders getting a little bit too far away. I mean, the Laugskaraz are going to come in here, do some damage. Aran Kialin, who are going to fight really hard on that front line. I mean, Scarahai Trappers, is that enough to rout Doriath? It isn't. But the Ash Priests are here, who are pretty much the ideal unit to send up against the Aran Kialin. So yeah, they should win. I mean, the problem is a lot of their numbers at this point, especially for TOL and Gaurhoth, are made up of units with such low melee defense that even finishing off a fight that they're winning is going to bleed them a bit. the Scarahai units are going to start to fall, and numbers are going to be important when they go up against something like the Nobles of Balar later on. The Marksmen of Balar here are going to start putting away some of these trappers. I do like the Falathrim style. The mix of Linden and Dol Amroth really does complete them for me. It works. The Brythonbar helmets are a little goofy, but I think everything else... Eglarest, big fan. The Noldor infantry, a big fan. As my voice starts to abandon me. Even the Orion Ephedune are really just going to sort of sit here and be a real pain. But credit to the red team here, they went on the front foot and they got what they wanted here. They are going to win this fight, and they are going to do so with units to spare. Whether that's going to be enough, ooh, that's a nasty charge coming in there from the Outriders. Marksmen of Balar taking a ton of damage. They might break. They stabilise in the end. A few of the Outriders do fall. Green Elves need to get them out of there, because that cavalry could be absolutely vital come the late game. It is a very, very close battle, this. Very back and forth. I still can't get away from thinking the blue team are going to win, and this is massive as well, actually. The Lancers of Anon in Galith. In the late game here, Fingolfin revealing their cavalry, charging into the back lines here and causing a mass rout. That's a real shame, because a little bit more damage done on the front line here by stuff like the Maithern and the Randirim could very well have made the difference, but I think this sort of cements in my mind that the blue team go into this final phase of the battle as overwhelming favourites because of those pole arms. The Nobles of Balar going to be able to do the business here, I think. Skirmishes of Rathloriel could... What on earth was that? Random sprites appearing in a line. But yeah, very good cavalry use. To be fair, that is how... That is Wallywolf's general. That is how they are having success over here. The Outriders doing the business. Going to be able to charge here into the backs of the Orion Ephedune. They might break here off this charge as well. They're certainly wavering. It takes a lot to break a general's bodyguard like that, but quickly losing the general and then taking damage like that from a charge can do it, but the Orion do stay standing, which will allow them to kill off a few more Scarahai. As many kills as they can get over here is going to be vital, but we've seen so many parts of the map used today. The North Quadrant, this sort of crossing over here, the river there, both sides of the island as well as the middle of the island. It's been a battle that has travelled, and that's always the best thing. They're always the most interesting ones. You don't want to see battles too often where it's just sort of one part of a vast map. This time though, we got to see so many different parts to it. But I think the Falathrim have got too much left. I think here in the late game, when you have this amount of phalanx units, it's going to be very hard. I'd be really into, because I think they've been trying to fire for a while here, but I think the Tirend lies down and still have ammunition, which could be really important as well, to be honest. There's still some Aran Kialim left alive, I think, somewhere. There's still 9 Donath, with Thingol himself moving with them. Kinsmen of Denethor, fighting hard. Marines of Eglarest, so spears. What have we here? The Lancers of Anon in Galith trying to nibble away at some of these units. What do they have left here? Yeah, you can see really that there could be a few units that have gone back into hiding, but even though they were winning this fight, it was consistently being costly for them, because so much of this sort of attempt to break out into other parts of the map was made up of TOL and Gaurhoth Scarahai, who are always going to make hard work of killing off really damaging Doriath infantry and stuff like the Orion Ephedune. Like, there's no real way to deal with them without incurring losses with Scarahai units. The Ash Priests are a bit of a different story. They didn't take that many losses at all, but them on their own is not going to be enough here, even though their axes are incredibly devastating. And as a singular unit, they're probably the strongest left on the field, but again, you can keep them at arm's length with those pole arms. And that really is all that needs to be said about that. I think at this point, actually, we can kick it into high gear, into times 6 speed, because all we're waiting for at this stage is for the Falathrim to organise themselves, pardon me, move forward, and as long as they don't make a horrendous mess of getting their pole arms into place, you would really back them here. Tirend lies down as backup as well. They've got those Lancers as well, 17 of them sort of roaming around to make sure that the cavalry can't be a huge difference maker. Very entertaining battle this though, very, very entertaining. Very back and forth. I think both teams had their good and bad moments, to be honest with you, but in the end, the conservation of strength that, in particular, the Falathrim have shown actually has been fairly key. But also certain engagements like Ossiriand being left in a choke point when they didn't have the ranged ammunition left to really equalise those fights. Always going to go a little bit awry for them. I think in the end as well, the assault on this choke point over here was probably a little bit too gung-ho from what was left of the Easterlings and a large portion of Finarfin's strength as well. The Arqueni Mormagilwa and the Bridgewater of Nargothrond and a large portion of the Wardens of Nargothrond as well were all lost in that assault, and that is probably the key moment there, where the Falathrim and Doriath, as they have done for most of the second half of this fight, to be honest with you, combining together to do very well in a choke point, and that has been the difference. TOL and Gaurhoth and Ossiriand going to be less proficient at that than a unit with heavy Noldor polearms, or an army with heavy Noldor polearms backed up by some heavy Sindar axemen. And there you can see going after the Ash Priest, definitely what you want to be doing. Peeling away at that strength that they still have left. They are very damaging after all. The Relentless trait, you can't really stun lock them unless you knock them over like this. This is the one situation in which the Relentless trait doesn't really work. Marksman of Balar moving in. The Scouts of GALEN actually do have a bit of armour piercing with their sort of 2 short swords that they wield, but it's not going to be sufficient to defeat the outright better stats of the Marksman in melee. 2 lighter cavalry units charging into one another, but I think the superior numbers of the Fingolfin Lance is going to be enough here. They do get away without routing, but what are they going to get away to do exactly, would be my question. So let's see, Scarahai, still some Mariners of Arenda, which actually broke there, which is quite interesting. In come the Marines of Eglarest. Tyrion Lysdanen getting into melee. They need to organise their pikes a little bit better, perhaps. I wouldn't even be all that worried about the cavalry, but turning them around and finishing them off over here, of course, Scouts of GALEN very quickly folding, which will allow them to get the full surround on what remains of TOL and Gaurhoth. And even with the brutal strength of the Ash Priests, it's not going to be enough on this occasion, but very, very close. 3% the difference. That could contract yet further as well, because the Ash Priests probably won't go down without a fight. The Donath are here, but they're not in great numbers, and to be honest with you, between the two, in that matchup, I would actually back the Ash Priests in melee. That 3rd hit point they have is significant, and of course the armour piercing really nullifies the really heavy armour that the Donath have. The advantage they have over the Sons of Húrin. But yeah, Fingolfin, even though their main army died, this is why you don't admit defeat when you still have a couple of units left, because you can still be so vital to how the battle ends up playing out. Because those Lancers, that cavalry charge, like the additional damage that they could have taken going through the Mythern and the Kinsmen of Denethor when they were still fighting without getting charged in the rear by those Lancers, it could have made a difference. I don't think it would have changed the overall outcome of the battle because of the sheer amount of nobles of Balar that there are. But it could very well have made a difference. And Fingolfin sort of ensured that wasn't the case, because they managed to keep one of their units alive, even though their main army perished fighting for the central island. I don't know whether I'd call this King of the Hill or what. Or a river battle? I don't know. Very good map though. And very good play on the map. This is going to be all she wrote, I fear. Some Ash Priests still left in here somewhere. And, yep, it's just the TOL and Gaurhoth General. Still using Azog's model, of course. I'm sure that won't be the case moving forwards into later versions of the game. But for now, Azog with his janky stretched hand. Still very much a feature in Silmarillion. Really good battle that, I really enjoyed that one. Everyone played their part in it. I don't think anyone, it's one of those battles where I don't think anyone will come away feeling super disappointed with how they did, to be honest. It's one of those. I I think maybe Finarfin and the Easterlings will probably think they shouldn't have charged forward into the south as they did, but honestly, like, the Easterlings and Finarfin did well in the initial engagement on the Middle Island. Finarfin also then contributed to Angband's downfall. Even though Angband were wiped away, their main army, which Gervais might feel slightly disappointed about, finished. Ultimately, he still held on long enough for the blue team to sort of get into position and do the business. So you can't complain too much about that, and very well played. So let's see. Highest kills went to Doriath, just about. And yeah, I think the dynamic between Doriath and the Falathrim on this occasion worked really, really well, actually. They offset one another quite nicely. The heavier Falathrim units are not necessarily focused around their attack. They're a little bit more focused around their defence. They bear that in common perhaps with Feanor's higher tier stuff, being Noldor. But, you know, they're more reliant perhaps on their sort of medium and lighter units, perhaps, for some of their damage dealing stuff, like the javelins, for example. That's by the by, though, because when you're fighting alongside Doriath, if you know you're going to be mixed with Doriath, you know that they can handle the damage dealing side of things, because overall they're probably the most damage focused faction in the campaign. So they can't just rely on outright numbers to do the damage for them in the same way that Angband can, perhaps. They need to have the quality there, which they most certainly do. Ossiriand can damage as well, but in a very different way. They did well on this occasion, to be honest. In several instances across the field, I would say that they were in a situation where Ossiriand maybe aren't designed to be in, especially fighting in that northern choke point. And ultimately their presence did deter the Mangonel river crossing from being used as well, because it wasn't just the Mangonels, it was the fact that Ossiriand had so many archers, as they often do. It's definitely the kind of map I think Ossiriand can be very effective on, because you have the combination of places to hide as well as choke points that you can use to really get the most out of units like your Randirim, and also your stuff like your Hunters of Rathloriel. I don't think anyone will be too disappointed with how this battle went. Even Fingolfin, who were basically the first army to have the vast bulk of their force destroyed, initially was looking fairly sketchy for them. Then they rallied with the support of some of their allies around the flank, and then when Finarfin arrived, of course, they got turned back. But during that rather short but sweet exchange, they got a fair amount of kills. They may have had the lowest amount of kills on their team, but it came in a very small window, and most of them would have been Easterlings, yes, but still they got some good stuff in there, the Easterlings. Those halberd lines can be very deadly. Let's see what did the damage, though, for Fingolfin. The Irimo Arantar, not that much, actually. We saw them get ridden down like dogs, actually, which is rather unbecoming of the guards of King Fingolfin himself. Sentries of Hithlum, again, short amount of time in melee, but 155 kills, can't argue with that. I'd imagine that's probably against Heimring units, because pikes generally don't get kills that quickly, unless they're against lighter troops. If they were up against the Lothlin units, it would have taken them far longer to rack up a kill count like that. Even, you know, the Dorloman units didn't do too badly either. Ferdsmen, like I said, for an entry-level unit, like the Ferdsmen continue, or the Feardsmen I should say. Is it Ferd or Feared? I think it's the Feared. Yeah, they continue to impress me. I think they tend to do better than the equivalent from Feanor and the Shield Bearers of Halavorn, which is kind of interesting because they're basically the same kind of unit in that they're sort of a unit of regular, cheaper spears, Edain Auxiliary, that you use to sort of support the main body of your Elven infantry. But yeah, doing very well. Blade Masters getting some good kills while they were there. Armatar of Barad-Ithor were really getting stuck in, and it shows, 234 kills, but very, very different sort of fates really meeting the legendary companies of Fingolfin. The Armatar doing brilliantly based on the engagement they were in. The Herumatar, however, were focused down probably by stuff like the Axe Throwers and Salamandrine Guard, I'd imagine, because only 12 kills is a fairly shocking performance from them. But perhaps the most decisive unit was the Lancers of Anon in Galith, because of course they were still a factor in the late game, still making it easier for the blue team. So yeah, I will say thank you to Demetrios, because while he didn't send this to me, I did effectively pinch it from the Discord, and it's you know, thank you to him for having the wherewithal to post it up on the Discord so that I could pilfer it. And yeah, big thanks to Eclipse for making this map, because again, new maps, new content in general is the lifeblood of these games, I find, and new stuff is always going to keep the ball rolling. And I think especially with maps like this, sort of high quality stuff, you know, it's not boring in any way. We saw, you know, huge amounts of the map used, which is again always what you want to be seeing, really. All good stuff, and yeah. So as for what's up next, I'm not really sure, because again I've recorded quite far ahead of time. You're probably likely to see this towards the later end of November, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you're this far away to be able to talk about what's coming up. It's possible that I'll be doing a video on the Lord of the Rings Amazon series towards the end of November / start of December. So by the time this video comes out, I may have already actually recorded that and put it up into the video roll, but we'll have to wait and see on that one, because I'm not entirely convinced I'll be doing it. I think I will be, but we'll have to wait and see on that, I think. So that's the only thing I can really offer, really, other than the fact that the schedule's likely to remain the same in terms of amount of content, as said in that channel update video past, where 2 pre-records a week. That's going to be remaining pretty much solidly consistent as long as I have the content to actually do that. And then 2 streams a week at least. Sometimes that may stray into 3, and sometimes it may have to be knocked down to 1 or even 0. Like I said in the channel update, there's going to be 1 week, I think, where I can't do it because I will be away. But yeah, the days may change, but ultimately that is the schedule until February, and that won't be changing, I don't think. So yeah. Big thank you to all of the players involved. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you'll join me for whatever is next.